trainers, Breya and Ria, for joining with us tonight and taking time out of their day to share some of their lessons and wisdom and work and some of their tips and things as we kind of work on community and build what that looks like. I'll hand it over to Ria, who's a member with the National Lawyers Guild, and Ria, take it away.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm just gonna start sharing my screen here. Pulling that up, cool. Nice to see you all again. Those of y'all who didn't get to join us last time are just getting this information for the first time. My name is Ria Thompson Washington. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a member of the National Lawyers Guild Mass Defense Steering Committee, and I also help train legal observers who observe the actions of police, not the protesters, at a protest and at actions. And so I am going to share some tips and some tools about resistance and repression and how to engage in the streets if you want to protest, and how not to get arrested. So this information that I'm going to share with you, just want to give a quick disclaimer that I'm not an attorney. I'm a legal worker. I went to law school. I hang around a lot of lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer. And so this information is for you to use to help prepare a defense in the event that you are arrested at a protest, or in the event that you come in contact with any kind of police. And we're going to talk about what it looks like, what you can do to protect yourself as much as you can, and hopefully we'll talk about some things that are interesting to you. But the first thing that I want to, before we get into this conversation,
Ria, sorry, before you start, I just want to let you know that your entire screen is being shared now, and I know when we were
Thanks.
Of course, I was trying to direct message you, but I was like, let me just let her know.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. Let me make sure I'm on the
No worries.
Is that the right screen now?
Right. Now we just see the okay.
Cool. I love that I practiced it and still messed it up. That's my favorite. So anyways, we live in the Zoom world. To start, we need to begin with an analysis of power, right? And so when we're talking about power, we know that the state is the government. The authorities, they have the power, and we the people claim it, and we need to claim it. And so that's why we go out into the street. That's why we protest. That's why it's written into the Constitution that you have the right to be out in the streets. But the power to resist and speak out is curtailed by the way that we show up in our communities, right? So somebody who might be gender non-conforming and Black is going to be perceived or responded to by police differently than somebody who might be cisgendered and white and male, right? So depending on how you show up, you might be at far greater risk during interactions with police. And so what I want you to learn from this training or from this conversation is how to keep yourself safe, how to keep your comrades safe, how to protect yourself out on the streets, but moreover, how to live through an interaction with the police officer so that you can prepare a defense to defend yourself after the fact. And since you are interested in resisting, we're going to talk about some of your basic constitutional rights, what you can do, what you can say, what you don't have to do when you're engaging with police officers, because you should know that police officers are liars and they're trained to lie. And so we want to make sure that when you encounter them, you're constantly, your rights are as constitutionally protected as possible. So let's talk about the First Amendment, right? We can all see it here. It says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the people or of the press or of speech or the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, right? And so it sounds like the Constitution is telling you that you have the right to assemble in the streets and to petition your government for a redress of your grievances. And we know that to be true, right? But we also know that we've seen, right, police are snatching people off of the streets. We've seen police are indiscriminately using violence and weapons against Black and brown people in the streets, against people who are peacefully protesting and people who are not peacefully protesting. There shouldn't be a differentiation made, because again, you have the right to assemble in the streets and you have the right to petition the government for a redress of your grievances. And some might argue that the Boston Tea Party itself was not exactly the most peaceful of protests, but it still yielded results, right? But so the reality is that at this point in time, the First Amendment may as well not exist. When you're interacting with police during a demonstration, they do not hold the First Amendment sacrosanct. You knowing your rights is not going to make them not violate your rights. And if they think that the need to violate your rights outweighs like your right to free speech, they will absolutely do that. And furthermore, because the way the courts have limited free speech in a number of ways, there's like unprotected speech, like fighting words or threats, or material support for terrorism, incitement to unlawful activity, defamation. Those are all examples of the ways in which your speech is not protected, right? And so, and those determinations are made oftentimes at the determination of a law enforcement officer or police officer. So these exceptions, like most of that sounds like legalese and legal jargon. And because this isn't a like First Amendment constitutional course, right? The takeaway of this, of the First Amendment, is for you to understand that the First Amendment will not protect you in an encounter with the police. I'm gonna say that again. The First Amendment will not protect you in an encounter with the police. And that's important to note, because everything that we're going to teach you on this training tonight is so that you can protect yourself and so you can be empowered. But you should also remember that the police, because they have weapons, because they have guns, because they are of the state, and because the court gives their word more weight than it gives your word, the cops will violate your First Amendment rights. They will violate any of your amendment rights. And so we want to make sure that you are able to prepare yourself or protect yourself moving forward. So this is a way that you can use your free speech as a tactic to support movement goals, right? And let's be clear, we know that the state doesn't care about Black people. We know that the state doesn't care about queer people. We know that the state does not care about like your rights. And so these constitutional rights, that when we talk about them, that's more of a hypothetical analysis, but the way that we combat state oppression and interaction and police interactions is by using these tips and these tools. It's good advice, but it's best used when people with privilege, that is white people, like white males, cis white gender people, use their privilege to use these tips and help in collaboration with their privilege to protect the bodies of their comrades, of Black people, of women, of trans folks, gender non-conforming people, because we always face state violence, the reality of state violence worse when we're attempting to invoke our rights. So it's important that you remember that your privilege can be used to help your comrades when you're out on the streets. So I'm going to ask, even though most everybody's muted, I would just like to see a show of hands for those of you who think that a police officer has to tell you the truth. If they have to tell you if they're a police officer. So if you're on video, raise your hand. If you're not on video, use the little hand waving thing to raise your hand if you think that a police officer has to tell you that they are a police officer. Okay, so the good news is that I don't see too many hands raised, right? So that I'm happy to see that, because the truth is that a police officer does not have to disclose to you that they are in fact law enforcement. That is a myth. That's something that we see on TV and people tend to believe that and think it's true. It's not true. Police are empowered to lie. They're trained to lie. They're tricked. They're trained to trick you into talking to them, to snitching on your friends, your comrades, to make you unknowingly turn over evidence and offer them any information that you don't want to give to them them. So the best thing that you can do when you're interacting with a police officer is not say anything. The police will not help you, they harm you. And when I say police, I don't mean just like your friendly neighborhood police officer. I also mean police on campus, police in schools, police, private security, private secret service police. In DC, we have 38 different like police departments. And so all of those different types of police, that is CIA, DEA, FBI, all of the alphabet police, I mean, every single last one of them, all cops, they're all liars. And so one of the ways that you can protect yourself when you're interacting with police officers is to recognize what level of interaction you're in with them, right? And so the level of interactions with police officers are can be like categorized into 3 categories. So you have your conversation, detention, or arrest. Depending on what is happening and what is being said and during these interactions makes the difference as so that you know like what level of interaction that you are and that you are with them. And so based on that, there's certain language that you should use if you are going to say anything, but the best thing for you to say when you're in an interaction with a police officer is nothing at all. So in the event that you enter like the conversation stage, a police officer is gonna casually, hey, can I talk to you if you're at a protest? Or they might ask you, do you know what's going on here? Or are you with this group? You don't have to respond to a police officer. You do not have to say anything. You don't have to talk to them. Again, because they're trained to get information from you, anything that you can say might unknowingly put someone else or your comrade into any type of harm. So again, your best bet is to say nothing at all. So if a police officer casually approaches you, if you're in the mall or if you're on the street or if you're at a protest and you are not being detained by a police officer, the best question if you're going to say anything would be to say, are you detaining me? Am I free to go? That lets the police officer know that you are aware of your right, that you do not have to talk to them, you do not have to give them any information, and you have no reason to stay there and entertain a conversation with them. So you can politely but firmly refuse to talk. Now, don't run, don't do anything that could be misconstrued or misunderstood as like furtive movements, because we know how police respond to that. So if you decide to leave or walk away, just turn and walk away. But don't engage. Now remember, you're never required to speak to police, but if you don't cooperate with them, like say if they ask you, for example, your name, now that can turn what may just be like a routine stop for them into an illegal arrest for you, right? If you give them a false name, or if you don't give a name at all, it may give them the opportunity to detain you longer, and at that point you're not free to go. And so it's in your best interest to really, again, politely but firmly refuse to say anything unless they ask you your name. Give them your name. Don't say anything beyond that. You don't have to give them your address. You don't have to give them your social, any other identifying information about you. However, if you lie to a police officer, that can be a crime. And so you want to make sure that you do not lie or anything that can be misconstrued as a lie. And the way that you make sure that you don't say anything that can be misconstrued as a lie is to not say anything, because the longer you engage in a conversation with a police officer or any law enforcement, the more likely you are to say something that they'll try to use later against you. So in the event that you ask, are you detaining me? Am I free to go? Which is the only thing you should say in a conversation stage. And they say you are free to go. No, you're not being detained. Turn and walk away. If the police officer says you are not free to go, and yes, you are being detained, at that point, the police officer has determined that they have reasonable suspicion, which means that they have something specific that they have determined is a reason that they can hold you. You can't leave, but they can only detain you for as long as it takes to investigate their suspicion. So that means that they can also like take you down to the station during that time you're being detained, but you may not necessarily be arrested. But they can also detain you in place where you are. And when they do that, they're going to try to search your person. So like, for example, if you're in a car and you're being detained, you can't go anywhere, right? Like you're being pulled over, even if you're not being written a ticket during a traffic stop or anything like that, you're detained. You cannot leave. If you're being detained on a street, that means the police officer has told you that you are not free to leave that space. It means that they are going to, this is when your rights to an attorney become applicable, right? So this is when you have the right to remain silent and when you should use it. This is when cops are going to try to like casually search you. And that'll be something like, oh, what's in that bag over there? They're not going to come right out and ask for permission to search your bag. And if they do ask for permission to search something, it's likely because they don't have like an actual reason. And so they're trying to get you to give them consent so that they can search your person and your property. Again, it's not something that you have to consent to. You should say, I do not consent to a search, so that now, don't try to keep the police officer from searching you, because that can get into, it can be construed as you resisting or like being violent or anything like that. So if a police officer tries to pat you down on the outside of your clothing, just assert through your voice verbally, I do not consent to a search. And again, like allow them to pat you down. And the reason that you take these steps and you're using these key words is because one, if a police officer has to like go to court and like tell the judge that, you know, that like you can, if you tell your lawyer, oh, I never consented to a search, the police officer is going to say, oh, well, they weren't being detained. They were free to go. They didn't have any reason to stay there. They could have left at any time, because again, police officers lie. And since we know the court gives their word more weight, we want you to be mindful of the ways in which you protect yourself, right? And keep yourself out of harm's way. And so that's why it's in your best interest to ask whether you are being detained, and if you're not being detained, to leave. If they do the pat down search of you, again, assert that you do not consent to a search. And it doesn't mean that they're going to respect your wishes, but it does mean that anything that they find on you during that search could be kept out of a criminal proceeding against you, should that step be taken. But trying to stop them from searching you could lead to arrest or additional charges or death, and we don't want that. We want you all to be safe. So in the event that you are arrested, again, the best thing for you to say is nothing, because anything that you can say, again, this part, like we know from TV, anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, right? And so at this moment, if you happen to get arrested, if you are at a protest and you're with a bunch of your friends and you all get arrested, don't talk about the action. Don't talk about the protest. Don't talk about what happened. Instead, like, keep each other motivated, keep each other, find ways to support each other, because being arrested is incredibly traumatic. Depending on the ways in which it happens, like it could just be very awful. So what you should do is, like, if you have chants, if you have protest songs, if you have like ways to stay connected with your comrades that don't involve talking about the action, that's what you should be doing. But don't talk about anything that happened or any planning or anything like that, because there's most certainly going to be folks who are arrested with you who could use that information to harm you or for their benefit. So the courts have like drafted some language and opinions that can help you in any of these levels, right? And so we just talked about these like magic words that could help you protect your rights, including your right to life, right? And so keep in mind that these magic words, again, They don't guarantee that law enforcement is going to respect your rights, but it may help you later in court, and that's what you want. That's what you need. And so again, for those of you who are taking notes, these are the three important phrases. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? I do not consent to a search. I am going to remain silent. I want to see a lawyer. The third one is particularly important because what happens is people will assert their right to remain silent and continue talking. If you continue talking, anything you say after you assert your right to remain silent or at any point, all of that can be used against you. And so what you want to do is make sure that you assert your right to remain silent, and then you remain silent, right? So again, as I stated earlier, if an officer, if they ask for your permission to search, it likely means that they don't have legal cause to search you. So when you say, I do not consent to a search, they're going to continue to search. Don't physically resist them because we don't want you to, face any additional charges. Instead, make sure you take note of the officer's name and badge number, if possible, which agency they're with. And again, beware of like casual searches and orders like what's in your bag, or is that in your back seat, or can you pop the trunk, or how about showing me what's in your pockets? Like those types of, when cops are using that kind of language, it's because they don't have probable cause, they don't have a reasonable suspicion. So they're trying to get you to give up consent so that it can be challenged later in court for anything they find. That's like the most common way that that searches are conducted, through people giving consent without even realizing. So it's really critical that you're very clear in your refusal to say, I do not consent to a search, or I am going to remain silent, I want to speak to a lawyer, or am I being detained, am I free to go? There's other kind of searches as well. For example, like again, if you're property, like if you're in a traffic stop, or in your car, or in your home, and also your cell phone, right? And so this is the cell phone search is something that we don't think about as much, but we should more, because when we're at protests, folks have a tendency to pull out their phones and record every single moment that's happening, which may be great for your like Instagram live or your Facebook live, but it's not so great for the safety of your comrades and other people at protests, because what we've noticed is that a couple of things are happening, right? For example, especially in these large action protests where there's hundreds of people involved, and you don't see police officers really rushing in to like arrest a bunch of people at one time, they're taking pictures of folks now, and later going back and posting those pictures to go back and back arrest people. So, and also they try to get, like, if they do arrest you at a protest with your cell phone, if your cell phone isn't password protected, meaning it's not protected by 4 or more digits, it means that if you're using biometric data to open your phone, like your face or your eye or your thumb or your saliva, whatever you're using to open your phone, it means that police don't necessarily have to have a warrant for your biometric data, because the Supreme Court still hasn't made a determination about how far your rights to privacy go, right? And so when we're talking about your phone, if it's not password protected and it uses biometric data, that means they might be able to open your phone and get information inside of it out. But if it's password protected, they have to have a cell phone. If you're ever served with the warrant at your home, read it carefully, immediately, call a lawyer or legal aid if you have access. And note that, like, for folks who have to deal with ICE, like that a common tactic that they use is like saying that they're looking for someone else at the door in order to get someone to open the door and push through. If a warrant is involved, ask them to slide it under the door. The warrant has to be signed by a federal judge, and the warrant will grant permission to specific area in the home. So if you can't slide it under the door, look through a window, but do not open the door in any way, shape, or form until you have read the warrant and you have confirmed that it is from a federal judge and that it can be that is specific to one area. So a warrant, a judge is going to grant a warrant for a living room or for a bathroom or for a kitchen. If it's for the whole house, it'll say that, but generally warrants are related to specific areas, right? Your roommate, be careful and mindful that if you have roommates, that your roommate can also accidentally give permission or consent to search your space. So they can give it to search your bedroom, but not necessarily the common area if it's something that isn't included on the warrant. So you want to make sure, again, that you read what's on the warrant. And the National Lawyers Guild, on our website, we have booklets that you can use, that you can get information that tells you exactly what's on the warrants if you want to find out more information. So you've been arrested. It's terrible. It's super traumatic. Like, nobody wants to go through this. Depending on like how you present, how you show up, it can be particularly traumatic for you if you are a person who is gender nonconforming or transgender and you are misgendered or placed in isolation or placed with a group that doesn't reflect your gender. You can being arrested, like folks can have panic attacks, folks like all kinds of things can happen, right? And so one of the ways that we show solidarity with each other is if you're arrested with your comrades, is to make sure that, again, that you don't talk to anyone else other than your lawyer about the circumstances of the arrest, even other folks that you're arrested with, your friends or your family. Even if it seems like folks who are arrested with you are on your side, they could be undercover police, or they could share information in order to get a reduced sentence. So just being smart and being mindful about what you say. If you're arrested as part of an action that has jail support attached to it, what will also happen is we will make sure that an attorney comes to visit you and make sure that somebody checks in with you to make sure that you whatever your needs are taken care of. And if you can't afford a lawyer, remember always that the court must appoint one to you, but only wait until you meet that attorney before you talk to anyone else. Don't talk to anyone else. Even like at the jail, people that you encounter, those folks are not on your side. They're not there to help you. Why you should never talk to cops, because you can be compelled to accidentally say something about yourself that you didn't mean to. Again, you invoke your right to remain silent, because police are trained to get confessions out of folks. And if you've seen the movie by Ava DuVernay, When They See Us, you've seen the ways in which police officers can coerce people, young people, a lot of times kids, to make false statements, and people who otherwise aren't used to being engaged with that system. But no matter what, it just never helps to talk to the police. You can't talk yourself out of being arrested. Even if you aren't guilty, you might admit your guilt of doing something for no reason, just because you're talking. Again, they're trained to get confessions out of you. Even if you haven't broken any laws, it is a crime to lie to the police. So the longer you talk, the more likely you are to say something that they might believe is a lie, or something that is contradictory that they can misconstrue. Again, police they lie, and because they don't remember everything with 100% accuracy, the court gives their opinion more weight. And so you want to make sure that you just are mindful of what you say around police, which is why it's best to say nothing. If you're a non-citizen, make sure that you know your immigration number. If you are traveling with a buddy, make sure they have a copy of your like papers or your passport or identifying documents, so that you can make sure that somebody can look out for you in the event that you're arrested. If you have the right to call your consulate. Do not talk to ICE. Do not talk to any federal police, but especially don't talk to ICE without an immigration lawyer. If anybody asks about your immigration status, you do not have to share that information with them. Always, always, always try to have a buddy with you, just to make sure that you have somebody who can reach out to your legal team or your family as needed. And then also make sure, again, you reach out to your consulate or your family as soon as possible, and do not speak to anyone without, especially ICE, do not speak to ICE without speaking to an attorney. So for folks who are transgender and non-conforming, gender non-conforming, again, we know that when folks show up differently, that police tend to respond in ways that can be more harmful and more violent. And so because trans and gender non-conforming people are often the targets of abuse and violence by law enforcement, and sometimes by other folks who are imprisoned as well. We try to make sure that we show up in solidarity for our families. So we verbally identify and object to targeting or abuse if we see it. Make sure that you use your privilege as your cis privilege in solidarity. And also it should be noted that technically that federal and state jails are supposed to do a case-by-case analysis under the Prison Rape Elimination Act to determine a person's risk for being sexually victimized or abused when they're arrested. And so that is done out of concern to make sure that that folks are safe as possible in a really harmful place. For folks who are differently abled or have medical conditions that may need medication or other type of support, I've seen police here in DC, Capitol Police don't care who you are. I've seen them arrest bunches of people who are using wheelchairs for mobility. I've seen them arrest elderly people, older folks, older women, like they don't care. And so you should be mindful that, like, if you're in a situation where you need medication and you're going out to protest, try to have a couple of days worth on you. Have a copy of the prescription just to make sure that there's no charges of controlled substance or charges for possession of controlled substance. Make sure that if you can, have a doctor's note with your doctor's name and signature on it, showing that you have that. So keep that on you, and then make sure that somebody who is not with you but is a part of your affinity group support has that information as well in the event that you're arrested. And also for folks whose gender markers may not match with what is on their ID, it's also important to make sure that you have somebody who knows that information, so that we can try to find you or help you out if in the event that you get disappeared in the system. For folks who are minors under 18 or even appear under 18, authorities are going to try to attempt a parent or a guardian. If you don't have proof that you're over 18 and you just happen to look under 18, you may still be held as a minor. And if you're going to be having minors out with you when you're protesting, make sure that they are there is adults who can vouch for them, because oftentimes a police officer will arrest also children, and they will not release them into the custody until anyone except for the custody of an adult. So if it's a bunch of young people who are going to be going out, then make sure that you have an adult with you who can make sure and get you out. And the last thing I really want to talk about is very quick is the types of charges that you can see. So keep in mind that when you're protesting, or when you're just living, right? Any encounters with police officers can result in any number of charges. When you're at protests, any actions you do sometimes can look like you're assaulting a police officer. Unlawful entry, blocking passage, crossing a police line, failure to obey. These are all reasons that the police will try to substantiate for arresting you. So be mindful of the way that you show up when you're out of actions, right? Listen for warnings, listen for the warnings of disbursement, and make sure that you're paying attention to your surroundings, so that hopefully you can stay out of the reach and the grasp of police officers. And My favorite freedom fighter of all times, Angela Davis. I'm no longer accepting things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And I leave you with that to say that hopefully you feel empowered to deal with the police in an encounter. Hopefully you recognize that you do have rights, and though they may not feel like they're, super helpful in the moment, this is the way that we protect ourselves and using our collective power to show up for each other. That's it. Thanks. I think there's a time for questions at the end, right?
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Ria, for that. I have a question. I see we have a lot of questions in the chat, and we're really excited to get into those after Breya presents. Emily, I think Breya needs to be unmuted. There we go. Perfect. So excited to just kick right into it and have Breya Johnson from BYP 100 talk with us more about jail support. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here again. I'm just going to talk a little bit about jail support, and just keep in mind I'm talking to you all. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't even do the work that Ria does. I am an organizer with BYP 100, so that's the perspective that I can kind of speak from. So just keep that in mind with your questions. So I am in BYP's DC chapter. I'm the education co-chair currently, one of them. BYP was founded in 2013. We're the Black Youth Project 100. We're a member-based organization of Black youth activists creating justice and freedom for all Black people. At one point, we were a hashtag, but then after a leadership convening by Kathy Cohen, we became a national organization. So to be in BYP, you must be Black, you must be 18 to age 35, and you must be pretty much in line with abolition, because we are an abolitionist organization, meaning we do not believe in police or prisons, and we organize through the Black queer feminist lens. So that's just a little bit about us. So jail support and protesting. So some quick tips when you're protesting and you get arrested. Usually if you're a part of kind of planning a protest, or if you are an organizer already and you know you're going to be there, collecting information about you, such as your name, your legal name and your preferred name, your date of birth, any high risk factors for you is something that your political home or political affiliated home would know. But if that's not the case, then we recommend some of these steps. Like if you're new to this and you're kind of just showing up, these are things to think about. So we usually always give out a jail support number at the protest, usually wherever the microphone is at the beginning, that's where it goes. And then also sometimes the organization that's had the heaviest hand in planning the protests will distribute the jail support number sometimes online. It depends on the risk level of the action. So protesters will be given the number. We recommend that you write the number on your body, write it everywhere, write it somewhere discreet, write it where it can't be washed off, but make sure you have this number. We don't recommend relying on your cell phone. We also don't recommend relying on pieces of paper. So second, you want to ask, if you are arrested, you want to ask why you've been arrested. And that's about it. So like Ria said, don't say anything else other than that. And then when you get there, you can call the jail support number, give them your name again, your emergency contact, your location if you know it, and the reason for arrest that was told to you. That's really helpful. But if you don't get a chance to do all that beforehand, what we recommend at the protest is the buddy system as well. So you can go with the buddy, and that buddy can have this information about you. Either you can distribute it via text message, or you can have like a note card that has that information. And sometimes what we've seen protesters do is, like, while they're getting arrested, if they're by themselves or if they're with their buddy, they drop the card discreetly, or they pass it to someone, just so someone can know who they are, right? It's really important when you're dealing with the cops and the state in general, that you never appear to be a isolated person, right? So everything is about the culture of community when it comes to navigating the police, because what we know is that they'll treat anybody terribly, but they'll especially treat you terribly if they know there's no one will come to your defense, and there's no one that will be able to speak up for you in any other way. So we always keep that in mind when you are at the precinct. Or, well, first let me go back a little bit. So the buddy system is one thing, or if you are a part of an organization and you're part of a jail support team and you're at a protest, usually there'll be someone that is there and designated to, one, watch the police as they're arresting people. Sometimes jail support people will discreetly follow police cars to see where people are actually going, and then sometimes you will have to convene somewhere and try to keep track of your people, right? Jail support is all about tracking. You're tracking your people. Where did they go? Who's where and why and who are they, right? All of those things are a part of the process. Not everybody is going to fill out the Google Doc form, not everybody's going to have a card. And so sometimes you're dealing with someone who's like, oh, I saw this person who got arrested, and you're just trying to figure out who are they? Who are they in community with? Who's their political home? Something about them so that you can keep track of it. And this is a really tedious and sometimes difficult process, but with trainings like this, it's very possible. But once you have a good idea of like where your people are, where most of the protesters were taken, you need to start preparing to go in shifts, right? So we recommend about maybe 1 to 8 people, depending on how large the demonstration was. And we recommend about like 4-hour shifts. And so you'll be waiting a long time. That's one thing about that. Sometimes it's just because there's so many people arrested that it's going to take a while. And, people are arrested for different things. And so it might take a while. But a majority of the time, it's just going to take a while because a police officer feels like it. And so we want to just keep that in mind. You will be waiting a very long time. We recommend that you always have water. We recommend that you have food. But most importantly, we recommend that you have a lot of patience, right? So people who go up to give jail support, you are not there to necessarily start off as agitators, right? You're there in support of the people or the person that was arrested, and like getting them out is the primary focus. What you don't want to happen is you don't want to get up there and get into it with any officers or get so frustrated that you start releasing either too much information, or you yourself get arrested, or they just decide to, play with you and make the process even harder. There is a role of agitation that is a part of jail support, but we'll get to that. But I would say starting off, that's usually not what we recommend. So again, you're going in shifts. You have the people in mind. You either have the printed list of who they are, or you have a note card, but you have a good amount of information about the people you are trying to get released. And that is really, really important. What is also important is that you prioritize people with any type of like emergency status or medical status, because those are the people who are probably scared the most, at risk the most, and so on. So if someone says they're diabetic, making sure that whoever's at the front desk that you tell them that, and making sure that the priority is the fact that that person needs their insulin or their medication or whatever the situation may be. Any other factor that makes them high risk, you do not disclose. And so that's what we mean about like high risk people. You don't need to tell somebody that someone goes to a certain university, like all that information, that's for the jail support team to know. That's not for anybody to say, which speaks to the fact that jail support is kind of like being the police liaison at a direct action. Like the police liaison is the most disciplined among us. Anybody can do jail support, but it does take a great amount of discipline, because you don't want to say too much or exacerbate an already terrible situation. So again, it's all about showing that this person is in community, that this person has community, that somebody is always going to show up for this person. You're going in shifts, so you're letting them see that you're not going to stop. They're not going to be able to tire you out because you're not just one person, right? It's the whole community trying to get someone or someone's out of jail, and that is really, really important. If it's a situation where someone ends up in jail a little bit longer, sometimes we do things like we create a folder. The folder is like information that about the person that kind of proves that they're in community. You may need this if something ends up going like to court, or you may need this for media reasons. You never really know. Everything's circumstantial, but like the folder is literally like what we call a community folder, where like we're compiling information about a person to show that like they are not alone, and this is how we're going to advocate for them. That's for long-term situations. Yeah, so just in personal experiences of doing jail support, I don't even know which story I told last time or which story to tell today. But I would just say that expect to be met with hostility. It's the cops. The same way there are at the street is the same way the person at the front desk will be, you know. Don't expect like the truth. Don't expect transparency. Don't expect for this to be an easy process. So another thing about jail support is this is not something that you do early in the morning when like you have work at 2, right? Like this is not a drive-by thing. Oh, they'll get out at this time. Didn't know. Jail support is like an all-day task. Depending on the demonstration, it can be an all-week task, and you need to be prepared for that. And you need to be prepared when the time comes to be the right type of agitator, right? You are going to have to agitate them. You are going to have to keep asking over and over. You are going to have to call and call and call. You're going to have to call from probably different numbers. Like you kind of have to, because I mean, you know, we're dealing with the criminal punishment system. We're dealing with the system of disposability. So everything about that system says lock them up, throw away the key. And everything that we say as organizers and protesters and people for Black liberation is absolutely not, right? So you have to be able to do that and to demonstrate that when you're doing jail support. Yeah, that's kind of all for me. That was like a quick one, but I can go into more detail with questions. I think, yeah.
Thank you so much, Breya. Yeah, definitely. Let's get to questions, and maybe I'll just read some out and then we can go from there. From the beginning? Okay, cool. So first question is for Ria. It says, since law enforcement doesn't always tell you they're law enforcement and you lie, can that be used against you before they identify themselves as police?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. And I'll let, I'm not sure Ria may know the more information about this, but even with the whole like undercover vans that were picking up protesters recently, like even if you were to defend yourself and like attack them back because you think you're getting kidnapped, you're still
resist arrest.
You're hitting an officer. That's how insane it is, right? Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah.
The next just retweet. The next one up is the full name required, or is your first name okay?
So you could try giving your first name, but if they ask for your full name, then you should give them your full name. Again, try to give as little information as possible, and yeah, you don't want to have to. You don't want to have to do that.
Definitely.
Don't give a false name. If your name is different from what is on your ID, give the name that you use, and recognize that there may also still be an issue with, you may have to explain to the police officer why your name is different on your ID, and so you might have to disclose to them your status if that's okay with you.
Yeah, so you want to really think about that, especially for trans people and especially for sex workers. Mm-hmm. You really want to think about what name you give. Usually you should just go with what's on some form of ID.
Mm-hmm.
the next question is basically, do you assert your right to an attorney by just asking for it, or by refusing to speak further? Can they continue to search you after you assert your right to an attorney?
Yes. So the moment that you are detained is the moment that your right to an attorney begins, right? And so you're detained, that means you can't leave. And so that means that at that moment, anything that you say can be used against you. So it's in your best bet to not say anything, to say, if you have to say something, I'm going to remain silent. I want to speak to a lawyer. And if you are searched, you can also say, I do not consent to a search. It doesn't mean that they're going to stop searching you, but it means that anything they recover through that search may not be used against you.
Got it. The next one is if someone who's arrested is not granted bond, what can we do? Call the magistrate, someone else, direct action protest, ?
It depends on where you live. If you live in a major city, there's likely a bail fund, right? Chicago, San Francisco, or the Bay Area, Los Angeles, DC doesn't have a bail fund because we don't have bail. We're getting there. That's a whole other thing. But depending on where you live, there's likely a bail fund that you may have access to. So if you can, try to get folks to be able to get out through that. Otherwise, you are going to have to get a bail bondsman unless you can put up the amount of the charge yourself, which is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. I know sometimes if there's no bail fund or you can't get that as quickly as you would like to, the next option is crowdsourcing, which we saw a lot this last uprising. People doing that via Twitter a lot is also an option.
Yep.
And then Allison is asking if you have any advice for intellectually disabled individuals.
Is that advice for them at protests?
I believe so, yes. It was
okay.
around, I think, yes, it was during the first presentation.
Yeah, so I would say that the advice for them would be that they have the same rights as everybody else. They have the same right to be out there as everybody else. And that all of this applies to the same way that it applies to anyone, because police do not care. And like, we know they don't care, right? Like, there was a case in Alabama in 2017 where police officers tased a man, I think it was like 17 or 18 times, and he was completely naked. He was having a mental health break, and instead of like, because they're not trying to help or serve, right? Instead of trying to help someone who's obviously having a problem at that moment, they tased them to death. So, and his family was trying to sue the state for that. So yeah, we all, unfortunately, as Breya said, this criminal punishment system, this criminal injustice system reduces us all to the same thing, and that we're all expendable.
Mm-hmm.
Something I think must be in a lot of parents' mind, or people who are parenting, from Tate says, have there been any instances where parents or guardians are charged with child endangerment for bringing their child to a protest? And maybe just top line, if you have any advice or recommendations on bringing children to protest.
So I haven't ever heard of that, of someone being charged for endangering a child to bring them to the protest. And I've seen people be arrested with their kids, right? Like at a protest, because again, police do not care. So I've never heard of that charge. That is not to say that a police officer or a prosecutor won't try something like that if they're trying to get you to do something, or so, I mean, we have to remember, like, the state will go to the greatest of lengths to punish you, to incarcerate you, to take you out of population, because they have the power to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've not heard of that either, but I think similar to what Ria said, all things are possible. Like, nothing really shocks me. that the cops would do, or a prosecutor at that, because they're included in there, right? Everybody is included in that. But general tips when bringing children to protests, I would say go earlier in the day. And I would say, you know, kind of pay attention to the organization that's posting information about the protest. Pay attention to where the flyers are coming from, right? So you have some things that are a little more credible than others. Sometimes I think it is better to go to protests that are a part of organizations that you already kind of knew of, right? So is it your local BLM chapter? Is it your local BYP chapter? Is it whatever like local organization has always historically been in that area? Are they posting the flyer? Are they promoting this in some way? Those are a little better than like this just popped up. We don't really know who this is. They just want to be in front of the White House to rah, 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 rah. And then you want to think about where they're asking you to show up to, right? So the protests that were at the White House were different than the protests that were necessarily on U Street. So you kind of want to think about where you're going, because that's kind of like anything at any time can happen. And if you're Black and a person of color, safety is precarious. So that's that on that. But just think about like where the protest is and what exactly they're asking you to do, right? If they're saying they're taking over some highways and they're gonna sit on there and stop traffic, is that necessarily for your young child? Probably not. It's probably really difficult for a child, especially if the child is younger, to be able to sit there around all those people. It'd be hot.
Really hot too.
Oh my God, yes.
So, you know, those types of, because when you're on a highway or even a protest that goes on a highway, you know, everybody has to get on that highway, right? If those are skilled organizers, everybody has to get on there. So you're kind of stuck for a little bit, right? So you can't really do too much. You think about that, which you want to kind of put a child through or not, right? That's different from like a car protest where it's like, drive up here, honk your horn. So just be more intentional about
different ways to show up.
Yeah.
But you know what, also to that point for Breya is making is that depending on where you are, like jurisdiction also matters, right? So like if it's like a private home protest, I saw somebody ask about that, like if you're doing a protest at somebody's house, like the way the police may respond to you might be different from a protest like downtown in the middle of the city, right? And so those kind of factors matter. I agree with Breya, like check the flyer, check the community of the people who are inviting you to go out, because that's part of your safety protocol as well. It should be.
And another huge factor, because listen, the truth of the matter is that some protests are just for you to be there and be seen, and some protests are deliberately agitating and blocking something, and they're in the spirit of, you know, no one's comfortable, everybody is going to be affected by this, right? So you kind of know which one you're getting at. I think it's one thing to be standing on the street with your signs, you're clearly out of the way, people can clearly move around you, it can give skirt really, really quick, versus we're shutting down highway, versus we're outside somebody's house for hours and hours. Like those types of deliberate tactics are important to pay attention to, because that's really when you're met with hostility, not just from the cops, but from other people, right? If I can't get to work, I don't believe in BLM, and you're blocking the road, I'm going to be hostile towards you, right? And so are the cops. So you got to think about things like that. If you're trying to take over the airport, you're trying to take over the mall, all those like kind of leisure things where you're bothering people who just want to pretend like the world's not falling apart, everybody's going to meet you with hostility. Everybody.
That's a good point. There's another question that said, if I get arrested and face charges, am I required to inform my employer, or will they be notified? I'm not sure if any.
That's a great question. It depends on where you work, and what agreement you have with your employer, and what the charge is, right? Like, I would say that, no, you don't have to notify your employer generally, unless you have signed like a non-disclosure agreement or something that binds you to disclosing what you do on your private time. And then I want to talk to you about why you're doing that. Like we could figure out how we could do better. But no, you don't have to. Your employer doesn't need to know about what you do on the weekend.
Yeah, and especially for student employees who are on financial aid, you don't want to disclose none of that. Is you don't want those problems. So just listen. They don't got you till they got you. So be quiet until they got you.
And they won't be notified either. Like, that's not how it works. Like, there's not like a list that comes out every Monday that goes to employers like, here's the jail list.
Enough for that.
Yeah, right. We're not coordinated enough to get like to have COVID relief. Like, okay, so like, let's be clear.
They just want to throw you away, lock you up, and throw away the key, and like they don't want to do nothing else.
I think this question might have been answered by Breya's previous point in terms of just like anything is possible and we shouldn't be surprised by the state at all. The question is, the question is, will bringing a cane or crutch to a protest be used against a disabled person?
I don't think so. I haven't seen that. Well, let me ask you this. How are you using the cane or the crutch, right? Because like if you're using it to walk, I don't think that it would be used against you. If you're using it to walk and then maybe later as a weapon, it could be used against you. So it's how are you showing it?
Yeah, and it also like, so there's like, again, I want to reiterate, there are two different forms of hostility at protests. There are the people who are against you and what you're doing and why you're there, and those are citizens as well. And then there's like the cop hostility, right? So that's kind of different. A cop really doesn't need to use your own weapon against you. A cop has a gun. So that's that on that. Now, if you're getting into it with someone else that is, you know, a counter protester or something else, then, you know, that can be a little different.
So Kate has a question for Breya, and it's, how has jail support changed during COVID-19? Do people getting out often need a place to quarantine if they live with other people?
So quarantine is recommended. I know most organizations are, you know, promoting that and trying to do that. Even the last couple of months, like BYP and BLM had so much supplies, masks, hand sanitizer, shields, you name it. Doing that when you're going, if you're a part of jail support, making sure you have the proper equipment for yourself. And do you have a mask to give someone when they get out? Another thing I forgot to mention in my presentation is like how to support someone when they are released. You know, yes, sometimes it could be hugs, kisses, rah, rah, rah. Most of the time it's food, water, supplies. Who do you need to call right away? Like those types of things. So factoring, you know, what you need in regards to COVID with that is important too. I mean, besides depending on the state, you would probably need a mask to enter and, you know, go up front. If the state doesn't care because it's one of the states that doesn't believe COVID is a thing, then you don't. But I would recommend having that. But in terms of anything else, I don't think most jails care because they're not quarantining people in jails or prisons. They're not really setting up any real precaution. Cops aren't wearing masks. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's really doing much. Terrible.
So I think the last question we have in the chat box is from Nikki, and it's, if you ask why you're being arrested after you've asserted your fifth, do you need to reassert your fifth?
It doesn't matter, because if you assert your Fifth Amendment and you keep talking to them, like you continue to use that against you. That's why you have to say, I'm not going to say anything, and then stop talking at that moment. And so if you think that you're saying something that can incriminate you or that might incriminate you, you shouldn't be. You should just not be saying anything as much as possible if you can. Yeah.
You gotta just be quiet. Like
so hard.
Because one of the things that I've noticed in my experience is like everybody thinks they're smarter than telling on themselves to a cop. Everybody does. Everybody swears they're not gonna slip up and say. It can happen so quick, right? They're hostile, they're agitating you, they're terrorizing you. You're not in the right state of mind to even be able to fully control the things that come out of your mouth, right? So they're yelling at you, they're accusing you of doing something, and you're like, no, I didn't do that because I was here at this time. Now they wanted you to say that. Now you're in a whole different situation. Or no, I didn't do that. She did it. You ain't even mean to snitch on her, but it just came out, right? You just have to be quiet. Just have to be quiet. Every question they ask you, they're asking in bad faith. And honestly, if they don't get you, they're going to get someone else. And if you care about community, you don't want someone else to get in trouble either. So it's like, just be quiet. Just be quiet.
Wonderful. I think that's it. I want to thank you two so much for coming back for round two. Again, it's like I've already listened to both presentations and I had so much kind of questions. And oh, sorry, actually one question I actually did have that I want to ask is kind of what are your, it's not new, but what are your thoughts on recently in Portland and other areas of the country where there's just plainclothes police officer or agents of the state who are just rounding people up. I know it's something that our youth activists have been specifically working on for years, especially around the Muslim community in like Minnesota and elsewhere. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts in terms of those, but a lot of people are also coming to this recently. And so they do think it's surprising or new. And I'm wondering if any one of you is interested in kind of shedding some more insight on that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's not new at all. They have been doing that to Black people since the beginning of time, especially in New York. I mean, everywhere, but especially in New York. Plain clothes, plain van roundups is a thing. It's always been a thing. And I think the excuse they're using now is like, they're trying to get people who are damaging property and they don't want them to run, right? That's how they get away with it. They make claims like that, but they've been doing this for a very, very long time. And what I find most problematic, it's not just the sheer terror of it, but it's the fact that in defending yourself, because someone is just attacking you, right? You can still face the same consequences as if you defended yourself against an officer in uniform. And that is really, really problematic. And we also have to think about the gender dynamics of that. There are men, cis men, jumping out of vans, just going after everybody, right? So if you think about like everything that we say we teach, women and other vulnerable populations about defending yourself and like run from this and that, it's very antithetical to in a sense. So you wonder why that would be the tactic. I don't know anybody that wouldn't run or fight when 5 men just get out of a van and run towards you. I don't why would you inflict that type of terror on people? Because you're the criminal punishment system and because you believe in state sanctioned terror. That's why, right? I'll let Ria go ahead.
And so the National Lawyers Guild is out deep in Portland, right? This is something that is not new, that especially to Portland, the way that police respond violently to protesters is not new to anywhere, right? But in this particular case, the levels to which policing has gone, because all of these people are standing up and out in defense of Black lives, right? And so the level of violence that we're seeing, the level of sheer carelessness about actual human life is ratcheted up a level because these people are in defense of Black lives, right? And so no, this is not new. It's always happened. I think that this current uprising happening in the middle of a pandemic, happening in the middle of an election year, makes it more, it makes it feel different, right? We're seeing the way that corporations are responding. Now you have everyone with Black Lives Matter on their shirts, and the WNBA has it on their floor before they're playing, and everyone's kneeling, and all of these other things, all of this, right? The end of the day, it's performative, right? Because it comes down to what are you gonna do when the police show up at your door, when they show up in your streets, in your neighborhood, right? And so everyone really needs to be we need to be out in the streets right now. We need to be pushing this more and continuing on, because because it's not changing. And the closer we get to this election, the more likely we are to see these tactics being employed in more places, and more like in a neighborhood near you, like, oh, you thought it was just Portland, you thought it was just DC, because it happened in DC first when they gassed everybody at Lafayette Square, like, and then it was like, oh, wait, we can't do this in DC. So let's go to Portland, a liberal city. Let's go to Atlanta. Let's go to Louisville. Like, just wait. That's what happens. Just wait.
Yeah. And I would add, like, yeah, it's not new. And also, like, the performance, it's performative when you'll go out to a protest and wave a BLM sign, or, say you're against police brutality, this and that, but you won't support anything that organizers say needs to be done to actually shrink and stop that system, right? So you can't support the militarization of police and then watch what they do in Portland and DC with shock on your face. They should not have access to some of the things that they are using, right? So we really have to interrogate why we think we need a militarized police force and a military. That's another day, but a militarized police force, right? We really have to interrogate that. We have to look at how we let fear mongering and lies about public safety exacerbate the problem. And we have to figure out how all of that harms Black and Indigenous people the most, right? So it just don't work like that. You can't vote yes on every police bill that comes your way and support every candidate that will give more money and more militarized resources to the police officers, and then go out and be like, how dare you beat people up? It don't work like that. How dare you gas people? But you saw in the budget at the little local council hearing when they said, we want to add $10 million more to our budget so we can purchase this. You're like, okay.
Or a city having $6 billion police budget in New York City.
$6 billion.
Billion.
So we have to, again, like I tell people when I give the abolitionists and the defund the police trainings, I tell them all the time, like, we really need to interrogate what public safety is, right? Who is actually being kept safe? What is actually happening? We need to interrogate that. It's not enough to say, I'm going to vote for this and do this because it makes me safe. Safety is an illusion. The police actually don't prevent any type of crime. What the police define as crime is usually just poverty crime, which means just criminalization of the poor. Like, you really need to think about how the presence of the police actually affects our society. And majority of the time, they make everything worse. And we keep telling people that over and over again. And once you actually sit down and process that, then defund doesn't sound like this crazy thing to ask, because then you start thinking, yeah, we should probably stop funding them for that because they can't do that. So that should actually go over here, right? They are not trained to respond to a mental health crisis. They are not trained to respond to a sexual assault. They cannot do those things. So they should not have that type of power. Do you really need police to be involved when somebody just has a taillight out? Do you really need that?
These are accident.
The acts, right? These are the questions that do you need police in schools? No. Like, there are so many questions
on the mic tonight.
Sorry, I'm like we could get into abolition because like this is where my spirit lives, right? And like as we're having conversations, because the last time we had this conversation, the words defund the police were not as widespread as they are right now, right? Like that national conversation was not happening. And like just in the 2 months since the last time we did this training, people are literally having this conversation. People who've never thought about abolition, people who've never thought about even reform, we're seeing that. So we know it's possible, right? We know it could happen, but we have to make that decision. And so like, I'm with you, Breya. I'm like, let's talk about abolition all night.
Maybe that's round 3, y'all. Maybe that's round 3.
Even about George. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say thank you two so much. I'm glad I asked that last question because you're at exactly the questions in terms of what's been happening. Like, we're supposed to be happy with just street graffiti and call it a day. Like, street sign says Black Lives Matter from DC Police, and that's what's supposed to kind of keep us content. But thank you for your work, which shows that it's our community and it's us who's going to look out for us. So I appreciate both you, Ria and Breya, for taking your time out tonight to join us, and everyone who joined, who tuned in from around the country. Our next protester training is on August 20th, and it'll be focused on how you can build a successful campaign to get police out of your schools, featuring our partners who were successful in Florida, Power You, in doing just that. We'll send this recording out so you can get some of this knowledge again, but I think that's it from us. We really appreciate you joining, and again, please show your appreciation for Breya and Ria for taking their time out tonight, for sharing all these lessons and all these thoughts that they didn't have to share with us, but we're blessed that they did. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Everyone.